Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host, Paul Rook. As always, we are exclusive to the PA UK radio network, and we are also joined in the studio tonight by Richard Clements and Kerry Greenaway.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Oh,
good.
Lots of chocolate on the go here.
Yeah.
Chocolate eggs.
Fatted out.
The Easter Bunny come and visit you today.
Yes, he did. Yes,
He was a bit late, to be fair, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, I had to buy the eggs myself, but it has to be done.
So they're a bit cheaper now, aren't they?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, yeah.
One's left over from the Easter Bunny. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that, no. But generally, no. I'm okay.
Excellent. Cool. And Kerry?
Yeah, I'm all good in the hood.
Did the Easter Bunny come to visit you as well?
Of course. Wouldn't dare not. God.
Did he bring you any chocolate, though?
He did.
Oh.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Excellent. Yeah.
very
No, it was, very nice. Thank you. Very nice.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. So, what have you been up to this week or since the last show?
Well, I've been really blessed actually, because I got asked to be a speaker on Sage Paracon, the online paranormal convention that's been going on at the weekend. Some amazing speakers on there, and of course amazing because I was on it.
Yeah, but come on, right? Yeah, but me and Richard didn't, so that's enough of that.
That's enough of that, yeah.
You got a shout out. What more do you want? Oh my god.
Okay, well that was their shout out. That's enough now.
Yeah, that's enough.
No, I was actually going to go on to all about me, but you know.
But was it really good?
Yeah, it was. It was really interesting, and I've never done a presentation like that. I've done workshops, but not a presentation, and it was like really weird trying to do it in that way. And I learned something from that. Do you know what I mean? So I know let's just say I acknowledge I need work.
Okay.
I'm sure it went really, really well, Kerry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel it could have been better.
Yeah,
That's
there's
for
nothing
me.
wrong with that.
As for me, apart from the eggs, now I've got to try and counteract the eggs. So I tried to put my push bike together today. I brought a bike ready for this post-lockdown fitness spree I've got to go on.
Yeah, we're all
I like
about.
Trying to shed a year load of, as you know, a year load of belly and stuff, because I have not got
to get that.
Pardon?
It costs a lot of money to get that.
Well, it has actually, yes. I mean, you can't, I've probably kept the chocolate manufacturers in business over lockdown. It certainly seemed to sharpen my sweet tooth a bit too sharp, so I'm going to have to blunt that down and hopefully get out on the road pretty soon.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so what's tonight's subject? What are we discussing tonight?
I thought we'd delve down into the crypt tonight, into crypts.
Oh, I love a good crypt.
I know, right? Because we would, as you guys know, we all talk on Skype. So, various topics come to the table. And one of those was a 1970s series, actually, called Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, we've got memories of it. Our main memory was the Crypt Master, right?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? But as for that kind of led us down a rabbit hole, as you can imagine, of memories. So we thought we'd take a little look at this particular topic. So we're going to start with the actual, Tales from the Crypt itself. Have a look at how that came about, why it's there, you know what I mean, and why we've got these memories, or weird memory of this weird animatronic Crypt Master in our heads.
Yeah, I must admit, I do just remember the Crypt Master. I don't actually remember the TV show, but obviously Richard's a bit older than me, so he remembers more of it than I do.
I remember the film of the same name, but not the series. I mean, but I was aware there was a series. I don't know whether Hammer done it or whether it's an American production, but I'm sure we will find out as we proceed along today's show.
I know, because it is a weird one, and then it led me down this thought pattern, actually, with why do we like this sort of thing? Why do we like these horror these horror stories. This was hugely successful. You've got to bear in mind the films, the series, and the magazine, the comic books before all of this. These were hugely successful. And so why do you think people are drawn to horror movies?
Oh, it's the age-old sort of thing, isn't it? You know, people enjoy being scared, isn't it? And it's sort of, I look at horror as the same way as people look at fantasy, perhaps. You know, fantasy films are very popular. And horror's just a sort of another sort of form of fantasy, but it's sort of set in the realm where it, you know, possibly, you know, could be true, you know, because there's nothing sort of too fancy in it, you know. They usually tend to involve normal people in everyday life in encountering stuff that is, well, not too nice, you know, sort of, you know, just the thinning of the veil, so to speak.
Yeah, and it was very much all ghost stories and paranormal type stories anyway. And I think people just have a fascination about the unknown. And, you know, just, yeah, I mean, that along with being scared as well.
Yeah, it's sort
of
the
adrenaline rush.
It's what paranormal investigators do in their downtime, isn't it? Watch horror movies.
Well,
absolutely.
This paranormal investigator doesn't.
Oh, right.
I think they're two separate things. I think horror is, like, when you look at some of the slasher horror movies, I think that links into a primeval kind of psychological... Because we are quite horrible as humans. We have a horrible side to us. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? The society has dulled that a lot over the years. But if you go back in history, when you go back to even like clan wars and stuff like that, and crime and punishment, when you look at those kind of areas of history, you kind of think that's another human doing that to another human person, and doesn't seem to have any psychological effect on them. It's like almost like part of life. You know, even when you look at the witch trials, that they don't seem worried that they're going to be effectively drawing a death sentence for another person. And, you know, the horror that you go through in that regard. So I think this is like almost like a primeval instinct that humans have. I think it's a very horrible side of humans. And you won't get away with it. You never get away with it in this day and age. Some people do, so you go into the psychopaths and stuff like that. When you look at serial killers, they live that, whereas most people don't. So it's almost like you can live out that, like fantasy, I suppose. It becomes a fantasy rather than a reality. Whereas at one time in history, our human psyche would have been allowed to indulge in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, I get where you're coming from. You know, it's sort of something we are sort of forbidden to do now, but not in the too distant past even was quite commonplace.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. Anyway, so, you know, this is the lighter side of it, because this is like the media side of it, isn't it? That we're coming into. Now, comic books... see, I found this whole history of this fascinating. They actually started in around 1929. Dell Publishing decided to take the comics. You know, you used to have a comic strip in newspapers.
Yeah.
Well, they took them out of the newspaper and actually put them into like a comic book, and it was called The Funnies.
Oh, right.
Right. Yeah, in 1934, Maxwell Gaines made a greatest hits version of the best of the Funnies and called it Famous Funnies.
Well, there you go.
Right?
Wasn't it like a pullout of another magazine, not magazine, newspaper? And that's why it's called The Funnies, because it's a comic strip comedy type thing.
No, I don't know, actually. I don't know how that was published, as in whether or not it was in affiliation with a newspaper or whether or not it was a standalone. But I think this particular greatest hits version was actually a huge success. Absolutely massive. I mean, you've got to remember, this is during the Great Depression.
Well, yeah.
Era.
Sort of, yeah.
And they were making like $30,000 a month profit. I mean, that's quite incredible.
That is, isn't
You
it?
can't afford to eat, but people are buying funny magazines.
Well,
Yeah,
it's blood, isn't it?
It's sort of there's a bit of a sort of a crossover between a past show we done on the Penny Dreadfuls. Again, they were hugely successful. This sort of pulp sort of magazines and stuff they do tend to sell whatever the sort of whatever society is going through at the time.
I think that is down to you need a bit of light relief.
Yeah, you need a bit of escapism, yeah.
You need that, don't you, when you're going through a horrendous time? You need a mental break from that. And if it's a comic strip magazine, then so be it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, Max decided then he joined a group that launched the All American Comics. Now, this sings to my little Paul Rook soul, because that began the publishing of the superhero known as the Green Lantern.
Oh, yeah, Green Lantern, DC Comics and all that.
I remember seeing a movie of that. That's quite a recent movie.
There is a movie of it, yeah.
And he also oversaw All-Star Comics that launched Hawkman and The Flash.
I do believe also American Comics was also the one that published Superman.
Might be a little bit later.
Oh, it may be, but I'm sure it was like an American comic one.
Yeah, I think Superman came out in the 1940s, didn't it? So it's a little bit later.
Well, Gaines at this point sold out his shares of the All-American All-Star, started his own publishing company called Educational Comics, or EC for short.
Oh, right.
Right?
So...
Now,
that's...
Sorry?
So he went down the more educational route, did he? Yeah,
he decided to break from that and do his own thing. And Educational Comics were what he wanted to do. Now, it didn't sell so well because he was focusing on like stories from the Bible and from American history. Right. So it didn't have quite the same draw as you can imagine that the Flash and the Green Lantern had, you know. But we don't know how that would have worked for him because he was actually tragically killed in a boating accident.
Right.
So his son, William, was actually then the new boss of EC.
Ooh.
But he didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't have a very good relationship with his father. That was a bit abusive, was how I read it. Back in today. And now bearing in mind, you're going back to a time when, you know, it must have been quite bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just sort of like relationships with family members, yeah.
So it must have been quite bad for him to say...
Normal family, then.
Yeah, he didn't want anything to do with his father's legacy or anything, yeah.
No.
Sort of, must be a bit of an undercurrent there.
Yeah, and he was, like, told he wouldn't progress to anything and, you know, whatnot. He was rejected by the Army, the Navy and the Coast Guard. Eventually, during World War II, ended up in the Air Force. Then he went to New York to become a chemistry teacher. And then all of a sudden, he's now got this, like, legacy of this EC Comics. And he's like, what? Oh, my God. This is not kind of what I want to do. So he then thought, right, well, okay, if I've got to do it, I've got to do it. Right? This mum's putting pressure on me, everybody. I've got to do this, right? And he thought, I'm not doing the education. I want to take it back to the entertainment. So he hired Al, God, I can never say that, Al Feldstein, who was an artist. Now, this artist, he didn't draw what you would imagine. He drew like beautiful women, such as Judy Garland, Lana Turner, you know, beautiful ladies of the time. And more the romance side of things. Okay. But that's kind of not what he came into the magazine for. So these two great minds sit down and basically go, right, okay, so what do we want to do entertainment, what do we actually want to do? And you've got somebody who doesn't really want to do it, looking at it from the educational side, and you've got somebody who's doing it for romance, coming together and sitting down going, okay, well, what do we actually want to do with the magazine? We want to do something different. And they thought about the old radio shows they used to listen to, like The Shadow and The Witcher.
Oh, right, yes, the old the old late night horror shows I used to have on the radio. Yeah, people like.
Yeah, and it was actually Feldstein himself that said they should start writing scary stories to scare the pants off the kids, basically.
Nothing wrong with that at all.
Right. Changed the name from educational comics to entertaining comics. And that was it. That's the direction they took it in.
Okay.
And then in 1950, Bill unleashed his new magazine on the unsuspecting United States. Now, they didn't just do it alone. They needed an entire team to launch the comics. So writer Harry Harrison came in, artist Wally Wood came in, pitched the ideas for weird science and weird fantasy to be expanded into the science fiction genre. Right, so they're covering all bases with this. They're sort of looking at all different areas to get their inspiration for their magazine. So they launched 3 different magazines. They launched The Vault of Horror. That was launched in the May of 1950, and that had the Vault Keeper.
Ah, I see. Yes, he sounds familiar.
Okay. Tales from the Crypt, which had the Crypt Keeper. That was in the October of 1950. And then they launched The Haunt of Fear, which was hosted by the Old Witch. And that was launched again in the October.
I think I might know her.
Yeah, I think we all know her, don't we?
So they kind of brought the humour in a bit with these characters, these hosts of the magazine. They brought a bit of humour in with that, but it was based in horror. And they've got these 3 magazines with this team of people working different areas. So it becomes quite you can imagine, can't you? I can imagine the boardroom meetings on this one. And they come up with horrible puns, such as "welcome, boils and ghouls." Things like that are still used today.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Now, Gaines noticed Feldstein's preference for film noir and the lovely ladies and launched crime suspense stories. That, again, also started in October 1950. Now, they focused on, I would imagine, if you can imagine in your head, like the 1920s gangster movie type things, love triangles, debauchery, all that sort of thing came in. All of that was inspired to go down that route. I think in my head I'm seeing Dick Tracy and things like that coming through.
Yeah, sort of thing. They're certainly covering their bases, aren't they, with things that sort of a young reading audience would be into, wasn't it? Gangsters, horror first, and then gangsters. I mean, you must love it.
Oh, you can imagine it's going out. They then decided that they were going to do another one, which was called Two-Fisted Tales, and this featured on the military and war stories. Now, by now, the Korean War is in full swing, should we say. So you've got, they've come off the back of World War One, World War Two. You've now got the Korean War going off. You've got lots of so they've got lots of strings to their bow, lots of different areas focused on. So, they're getting quite a nice little stable of magazines or comics that are being released.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with that as well, they could get a lot of propaganda into that as well, couldn't they?
Now, with this, you can imagine it was bi-monthly, and the gang, all of these people involved, are just reading everything from dime novels, TV programmes, anything and everything. And they sometimes had to borrow ideas, shall we say. I like the way borrow, in inverted comments, from established writers. Now, one of these writers was a science fiction writer, Ray Bradbury. Now, basically, Al and Bill outright stole some of his stories, used them in weird science and weird fantasy. Ray kind of read these and thought, hang on a minute, that's my story. Wrote them a letter saying, excuse me, you owe me money because they're my stories. Yeah. Now, Bill Gaines, and this is kind of where you can start to see the entrepreneurial skill of Bill comes through, because he wrote back to Ray Bradbury. God, again, we're getting to that point of the night where I can't speak. He put, there you are. We were wondering how we could get in contact with you. Of course we'll pay you royalties. Not only that, how would you like to illustrate and adapt some more of your stories? And then that was it. Ray Bradbury becomes part of, like,
a sudden way of doing it. Yeah, well, I doubt that would happen these days, but yeah,
totally plagiarised his work and then spun it around.
Yeah, a good bit of spin there.
Love it, right?
Yeah, and I bet he was still left there, like his speech in hand, mouth open, and he's like, "Okay,
actually, yeah, it might be giving you more money than the books are bringing in."
Yeah.
But I kind of think that gives you an idea of how Bill is very entrepreneurial, and he has a charisma about him as well. And I think that's quite important for something like this. To sell something, you have to have kind of the charisma, don't you?
Yeah.
Anyway, for 2 years, all of these comics swept the nation. They were smash hit, but they started to get a bit dark, right? The crew was pushing the limits, as it were, the boundaries, there was excessive swearing, rotting corpses, buckets of blood, dismembering, beheading, really gruesome stuff, right, that comics had never seen before. And the primary storyline usually involved a villain getting his comeuppance with an ironic twist towards the end. Step too far, do we feel?
Yeah, you can hardly blame those meddling kids, can you? With stuff like buckets of blood.
I mean, one story in particular involved a local butcher who was trying to increase his profits by selling crap meat that he'd bought cheap. Now, it kind of caused a lot of townspeople to start dying from food poisoning, right? And his own son ends up dying from the meat. The wife then hacks him up and serves his severed parts at the deli counter.
But is that any different to Sweeney Todd?
I thought that.
Well, yeah, there's certainly a sort of like an overtone or an undertone, should I say, of Sweeney Todd behind that, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's got to be.
Exactly, but I think the way it's done, and don't forget it's his graphic as well, because you're not just reading a story. So up to now, you've kind of just read stories, and your imagination plays that part. In comic strips, you're seeing it.
Yeah.
And although it's like drawn, the illustrations are drawn like comics, it's a totally different, it takes it to another step when you're actually seeing it, no matter what format it's being fed at you. Bearing in mind, you've got to remember the time that this is taking place. Early films, early TV, you know.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is very sanitized. There's a lot of restrictions on what's being seen. It's very wholesome. And then you get this comic strip that's not quite so wholesome. It's a little bit gruesome, shall we say. So I think it's like a step too far. So they had a lot of people complaining. Parents, politicians, all sorts. So, you know, they're hitting the button, they're getting the sales, people are loving it, but then on the other hand, they are also getting a lot of complaints about it as well. Now, unfortunately, American society at that time, we're talking the 1950s, remember?
Yeah.
You've got to remember what it was like. There was a lot of racism, a lot of bigotry, right? So Bill then thought, you lot are so hypocritical, so I'm going to highlight this. And because his argument is, you're complaining that my comics are too violent for children, yet what are you doing out actually living your life? You're separating drinking fountains for blacks and whites, and, you know, the bigotry and the racism that's going on and the violence that's created against black people. It was just, the hypocrisy for him was just too much. So he decided to kind of call society out a little bit. And in 1952, Shock Suspense Stories added a new line and became known as Preaches, because they had a moral and political based storyline.
Oh, right. I see. Clever.
Okay, now one of the most famous stories involved a Jewish family moving into a predominantly Catholic neighbourhood. The ringleader of the Christian mob did everything they could to run the family out of town. In the end, he has their house burned down to drive them away, not realising the family was still inside. Kills them all. Horrified, the leader's mother revealed in front of the mob that he was half Jewish all along. The town then turns on the leader and got a taste of his own medicine. Now, that's quite a pill to swallow when reading it in a magazine that you're used to. It hits a nerve.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where he went with that, and it didn't go down too well, I can say that for sure.
Yeah, when you hold up a mirror to society, yeah. Gosh, I bet they were all up in arms about that and all.
Yeah.
Of course they were.
It kind of put the preachers put EC over the top, and then it became a real target for the top politicians. So before it was rumblings of discontent about the magazine, and now it's got a spotlight shining on it because of the preaches that he was doing. They couldn't. It just was a step too far too early. He was quite progressive in his own way, in his own moral standing, and being able to even see how hypocritical society was being set up. He was quite progressive in that. But it was a step too far for some people. And as I say, once he had this spotlight on him, it was, it was just a little bit too much too soon for society to accept. And basically, EC Comics are telling everybody how much they suck twice a month.
Yeah.
Now, this comes to a head in April of 1954. Dr. Frederick Wortham published The Seduction of the Innocent, which basically said comic books were the downfall of American children. And he actually really believed what he was saying. He said this with great fervour. This caused a big upset. Well, Gaines was then brought before a Senate subcommittee to explain himself. And Gaines actually argued the notion that comics were responsible for the downfall of children was ludicrous, but he actually made a fatal error and put the blame on himself, trying to shield the staff at EC and his comics. So he took all the blame on himself. Right? Now, this led to the Comics Code Authority Panel being introduced, which was the national team of editors responsible for deciding what can and what can't be written. So such words as horror, terror, weird were all banned. Gratuitous sex and violence would no longer be tolerated. So, oh God, that's hit your crime magazine, that's hit your horror magazines, that's hit your war magazines, that's hit just about every magazine that you're producing at EC.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all this censorship was directed at the company, Bill Gaines and EC.
Right.
Bill Gaines turned around and went, sod that. Carried on doing exactly what he wanted when he wanted to do it. But he then faced a backlash from his distributors. So it's not just like you don't just produce a magazine and everyone buys it. You have to sell it somewhere. So you outsource it to lots of distributors. Yeah. None of us can say it.
We all know what you meant.
Yeah.
A distribution network.
Yeah. So that's then where you get hit. So how it gets to the newsstand. So delivery drivers who are taking the magazines out were being attacked, believe it or not. And the comics were being burned right in front of them. Nobody wanted to distribute the EC line of comics.
Well, there you go.
And so with no one wanting to have his comics, Bill then threw the towel in. He sort of went, I've had enough of this. And in February of 1955, he cancelled most of his science fiction and horror comics and basically joined the Authority. And he went to safer comics such as Tales Calculated to Drive You Mad, Panic and Incredible Science Fiction. Even that was a little bit weird because, again, there was another confrontation with the Authority in 1956. He tried to reprint a story that was first introduced in 1953 in Weird Fantasy called Judgment Day. And that caused an issue. And even though that had already been published before, everyone had forgotten about it. So when it was republished, it was like, well, hang on, it's already been out there. And they're like, well, no one remembers that because obviously you've got to remember this is the days before internet.
Yeah.
Now these are all
this is the whole witch hunt, isn't it? Really, because if it's been done before, and it's like, oh yeah, we'll conveniently forget that one, and we'll just, because we don't like him, we'll have him over this one.
Yeah, exactly. So people have forgotten that, but now we've got this Comics Codes Authority.
Double standards. It still goes on today.
But now we have an authority that's going, I really don't think so. So they refused to print it. Gaines called up, asked why, and then he said, basically, you can't have a black man in position of power over this particular story. The story basically was based in outer space, and the hero of the piece was always shielded. You couldn't see him because he had his astronaut helmet on, obviously. Once he took his helmet off, it turned out to be a black man. And the problem was, you can't have a black man in a position of power.
No.
Now, Bill was furious about this. He told him that he'd better print the story, or else he'd go to the press and raise a big stink, because the civil rights movement had begun a year earlier. So now, all of a sudden, society's swinging round. We're now coming, the Civil Rights Act was starting to gain traction, as it were. So Gaines is now going, well, I'll go to the press and you won't look good. So they did relent, and they did actually say, okay, fine, you win this battle. What we'll do is, that's fine, we'll accept the black man, but you need to get rid of the beads of sweat that are on his forehead. I really don't actually understand why they were worried about beads of sweat on the black man's head to be removed, but they did. Now, that should have been enough. Should have gone, yeah, okay, it's only a few beads of sweat. I mean, come on, we'll just redraw it. It's fine. But but Bill told Murphy, the guy who was telling him to stop, to basically go and jump off a cliff, we'll say.
Go forth and multiply.
Yeah, go take a hike.
Yeah, it got really cross. I think he had a bit of a temper, old Bill. And that was it.
Just a bit.
That was it for him. But there was no... I do think Bill Gaines was a little bit... I think he lost his temper with the situation. I think they'd given him a bone. He should have run with the bone, and he didn't. He didn't want to change anything. So he sort of... He reached the end of his tether, really. So he saw no reason to continue publishing comics, and then ended the 10-year run of EC Comics. So that's how the comic side of it ended. But that wasn't the end, obviously, because we're still talking about things like this now, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he sort of laid the foundations for sort of this sort of genre of sort of horror, wasn't it? Which is good.
Now, EC Comics came to an end in 1956. You know, what happened? Bill was all right. He had a gold mine to fall back on. Tales Calculated to Drive You Mad changed from a 10-cent comic to a 25-cent magazine and was reduced down to Mad magazine. All the other guys was safe in the clutches once it became a magazine, and that was a smash satire. It's still published to this day. So
Mad is
it's covering topics such as like parodies of Stranger Things, and then in the 70s, going back to the influence of the magazines of EC, 2 movies came out as Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror, totally inspired by the comics, and So this is why we then get these things, not, people were remembering what they were reading like when they were kids and bringing them into date. In 1989, Robert Zemeckis, you got him.
Robert Zemeckis, he done Back to the Future and things like that.
Yeah, and Richard Donner, who did Lethal Weapon.
Yeah.
They teamed up, launched Tales from the Crypt as an HBO TV series. And this is where the Crypt Keeper, that's the one that's in our minds, Now, he was voiced by the brilliant John Cassia, actually. And that show, the HBO show, lasted for 7 years.
Well, it had quite a run then.
Yeah. It did. And in 2007, Tales from the Crypt was relaunched by the company Paper Cuts with all original material that lasted 13 issues. So there's a legacy there, isn't there, by Gaines and Feldstein and EC Comics,
which people are still drawing on today. Well, up until quite recently.
Yeah. I do believe there was going to be another film, but because of the situation, I think it put a bit of a blockers on that one for the time being. So we've got this, this situation that's come off the back of this brainstorm of an idea that became hugely successful, that has gone on and on and on and has not lost its appeal. And we went down this Crypt sort of like avenue, and have done on many other shows. So why have we got this? When we're investigating, if it's got a dungeon, we'll have a dungeon, right?
Yeah. Well, they seem to be the magnets you're all drawn to, isn't it? And of course, it's the reputation and these sort of places have. I mean, dungeons and crypts, and even though a crypt is slightly different from a dungeon, I mean, a crypt is where basically you just lay people to rest, and a dungeon sort of brings up, you have suffering in a dungeon and stuff like that. But it wasn't always the case, was it? I mean, usually castles and stuff would have a sort of like a tower or something sort of put aside to put dissenters and prisoners in, but and dungeons were basically just storerooms originally, but as sort of space became more sought after and sort of living accommodations within these castles, I mean, it's sort of like the dungeon would also double up as a place to actually hold your captives.
Mm-hmm. Love a good dungeon, mate.
Mm-hmm. What I think people get confused, I think there's a confusion between a dungeon, what you would imagine, and a jail.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think there's that confusion of like, you're right. In a Motte and Bailey, the actual underneath the main part of the castle, the Bailey bit, the middle bit, that's right, isn't it? The main keep bit. It would have been storerooms below there. That's the strongest, most defensible part of that area. So they would have all their storerooms, down below the dungeon. And Rich is completely right. So if they had any prisoners or something, they'd shove them down there, and it wouldn't be like a cell like you would imagine. That comes more later when we start seeing things like jails coming in. So when you start looking at
or sort of purpose built sort of things for prisoners, whereas the dungeon, I mean, we all have the image of the dungeon as being a high vaulted sort of room, don't we? And with just chains and manacles sort of in one corner. But but it was mainly storerooms they were originally.
Yeah, so there is an evolution with that as well, and there is a sort of psyche kind of confusion between a jail and a dungeon. And that's a lot of that is driven through media and things like the magazines and stuff like that we've seen. Whereas historically, not being funny, very rarely, unless it was for a political reason, you wouldn't have prisoners, you would just kill them.
No, that's right. And you weren't perpetually at war or whatever. There wasn't perpetual conflict. And castles were not sort of principally, they were sort of strong points, but families lived there. You lived at your castle as well. So whilst you're living there and everything, you would use your storerooms as your storerooms. And then in times of conflict, if you did acquire prisoners, then you'll put them down there with everything else as well.
But I think that's where we have to discern the difference, because you would very rarely keep a prisoner, in that way.
It all depends. Usually the lowerly sort of prisoners would be dispatched, but if you had someone of note, someone worthy, you would keep them and offer them up for ransom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and send bits of them home in envelopes.
Now, we did look, because we thought in our various searches regarding, when we've looked at jails and dungeons and torture and stuff like that, we've always looked at the focus has always been on the person that's been captured or the prisoner. The famous people. We wanted to find a famous crypt master or a dungeon master for you. Couldn't find one.
No, they're
a bit
not
shrouded in mystery.
They seem to be lost in the midst of time, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if we'd been able to go to archives, we probably could have found them, the names of them.
You could have found the name of a jailer, couldn't you, or something like that. But generally, no, they tend to be missed out upon in the annals of history.
Yeah, which kind of suggests to me. I mean, we found when we was looking at Newgate, we found like the executioners.
Yep.
That was not a problem. We could reel those off for you. Done that already for you. But in regards to like an iconic crypt master or something, it was very lacking.
The crypt keeper. That's the only one.
Yeah, couldn't find one. Right?
No.
But we could find plenty of stories regarding it. Now, one of the most fascinating, we're going to look at a few of these famous stories of quite horrible things, really. Horrible histories we're going into next, guys.
Yeah.
Right? And these happen. These are true places. These places you can visit and go and see and, you know, tourist trap type thing, or investigators. The next one we're going to talk about. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is actually a famous place on the old Irish paranormal investigation circuit, and this is Leap Castle.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Don't know much about it.
It looks beautiful. It's a family, I say a family home, it's massive. It's gorgeous, right, when you look at it now, but it's actually been the base of some horrendous things that have gone on. When you think about it. And it's also a place that actually has an oubliette.
Ooh.
Oh, I wonder when the oubliette will make an appearance.
Oh, gotta love an oubliette. Now, our image...
Hoggle loves an oubliette.
Now, our image of an oubliette is basically a long, dark hole that you can barely stand up in, that, you know... it changed, you know, the translation is forgotten place.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the translation. So when you put someone down there, you're basically putting them down there to forget about them. Right?
Yeah.
And again, media has sort of like taught us that, you know, again, we've got a false representation of this because there aren't many where it's just a hole in the ground where someone can stand up in. There aren't many around that are actually true oubliettes, but there is one in Leap Castle.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the Bloody Chapel. Now, the Bloody Chapel is actually where a lot of the spirits of Leap Castle are supposed to be, right? So there's lots of paranormal reports.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, and this has been reported for a lot of years. Now, in 1922, the castle was actually left as a burnt-out shell, and it was kind of ignored, really. But people would telephone and say that the chapel was being illuminated. This was afterwards, so it's a ruin at this point. And this is all these paranormal activities that happen there. Strange smells of rubber have been reported there. There's a well-known apparition there as well. There's lots of elemental is supposed to haunt there. All sorts of weird and wonderful things go on there. Now, I think when you look at this, you have to look at the history of this place. Now, in 1532, so you're going back quite a long time, there was a fierce power struggle between the O'Carroll family. Brother fought against brother, and it was all about chieftainship. So this is almost like clan war kind of thing, but within the family, who's going to be the head of the family, right? Now, legend has it that the O'Carroll murdered his brother, who was a priest, whilst performing a mass in the upper hall of the castle. And it is believed that the priest started the mass before the arrival of his brother, and it was a great insult, angered the O'Carroll. He then slaughtered his brother where he stood, and he's been seen in the Bloody Chapel. Right? Now, the Bloody Chapel is where the oubliette is.
Oh, right.
And it is located in the northeastern corner of the Bloody Chapel. Right, now, it is originally thought that the chambers were used to store valuables or to hide, like a panic room.
Panic room.
In the event of a siege, right? But the O'Carrolls used this chamber for a lot more sinister reasons.
Yeah.
They actually modified this chamber to serve as a small dungeon where prisoners were thrown in to die, basically,
Right.
or even once they were dead. Now, it starts as a narrow hole and then opens up sort of in it once you get in it. So the actual opening is only like a narrow hole. And this is why it's got the name oubliette, because it is the French to forget.
Yeah.
Right? And once they were thrown into the oubliette, they were forgotten about. Now, the O'Carrolls, were very mercenary, very mercenary. Generally, what they would do, they wouldn't do the deeds themselves. They would actually hire other clans or other mercenaries to kill off the nearby threats, right?
Yeah.
Once they'd done their job of killing off the threat, they'd invite the mercenaries back to Leap Castle for a feast. As you do. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Come along. Let's have a party. But the mercenaries were kind of like, it was a false sense of security, because once they were at the feast, they were generally poisoned or their throats were cut, and then their corpses were then thrown into the oubliette.
Yeah.
Right, 39 of the O'Neill clan are said to have been disposed of in this fashion.
Must be a big oubliette.
Now, this reminds me actually of something that Paul will recognise greatly. It's the Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Is it the Red Feast or something?
Yes, it was the Red Feast, wasn't it? After a wedding or something.
Yeah.
And they invited the Starks back to have a bit of a feast, and then they slaughtered them all.
Yeah. This is a bit like that, right?
Yeah.
So you're all having fun, false sense of security, and then, everyone's
Off
dead.
with your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
Oops, your head fell off.
Yeah, oops, soz, and all that.
Yeah. You enjoyed it so much, your head started rolling on the floor.
So they're quite ruthless, this clan, the O'Carrolls.
Like them already.
In 1599, another deadly deed occurred. Charles O'Carroll, the last chieftain at Leap, was at war with the Earl of Tyrone and hired the MacMahon clan from Monaghan, oh God, it's Irish, as mercenaries.
Monaghan,
They fought him, and again they held the feast for the mercenaries, and they murdered them in their sleep. You know, rather than at the meal, they fed them first, made sure they were all fatted out and fast asleep.
Drunk.
Yeah, and then murdered them in their sleep. Now, the MacMahon clan are said to haunt the Great Hall at Leap Castle because of this.
Right.
Okay. Now, during the occupation of Leap Castle by the Darbies, the oubliette was actually cleaned out and the contents removed during some of the renovations. It was said allegedly, that 3 cartloads of skeletons were actually removed from the oubliette during this time.
Okay.
So, if true, that does, tend to back up the stories, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It does, definitely.
I wonder if this O'Carroll family is still around, because isn't Brandon O'Carroll he's Mrs. Brown, isn't he?
Oh, I don't know.
That's his name. Brandon O'Connor. Whatever we're talking about, the O'Carrolls, that's it. Brandon O'Carroll.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's quite a common name in Ireland, probably, you'll find.
Probably is, but it'd be good if it weren't.
Now, some believe that this cleaning out of the oubliette is actually caused an emotional shockwave through the castle, and that many of the spirits that now haunt the castle, and including the elemental, by the way, got to throw an elemental in there, were actually woken from their dormancy, and which is why it's so active to this day. That could be propaganda to make go, it's the most haunted place in Ireland kind of moment.
But it certainly ticks all the boxes, doesn't it? For sort of to attract the teams that go there and investigate, if they do still investigate there. I don't know, but it certainly has everything, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Doesn't it?
It is a very, very interesting one. Now, the information I got on that actually came from the Leap Castle website itself. So if you want to go and check out more and find out more about the elementals and stuff like that, and the history of Leap Castle, then go over to their own personal website and you'll see photographs of the beautiful building and lots more horrible history on that one. But I find that concept fascinating, actually. Children. Why do we have them? They're a horror story all unto themselves, is all I'm going to say. I do apologise for any background noise that you might be hearing through this show.
Right.
Okay. Lockdown is coming over. It's nearly over. Nearly. We're nearly out of it, folks. So let's have a look at an actual crypt. You know, we see... Right, now, this is another thing, right? The difference between... Right, so that's in a castle. That's in Leap Castle. We talked about the oubliette kind of scenario. Now, a crypt is different from a mausoleum. You could have a crypt inside a mausoleum, but but they're very subtly different. So a crypt tends to be where the body is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you could have more than one person in a crypt. Tends to be underground, yeah. And then above it, you'd have a mausoleum. So you'd have a fantastic Gothic structure or something put on top.
Yeah.
Right? So in a mausoleum, you very rarely find bodies, whereas underneath, in the crypt, you could have lots of bodies from the same family.
Yeah.
And that's the bit where the bodies are. So that's it. Now, in Barbados, there's a very famous crypt that we're going to go on to talk about, called the Chase Crypt.
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard about this one.
It's a fast runner, this one.
Don't know much about it, but it has sort of something that's sort of like cropped up from time to time. It's to do with sort of moving caskets and stuff like that, isn't it? Exactly.
Now, in 1812, wealthy landowner Colonel Thomas Chase died by his own hand on the island of Barbados. He wasn't very well loved. He was known for excessive cruelty to his slaves. He had a very bad temper. And his body was borne to the family vault. Now, he'd got that 12 years before. He'd already put two of his daughters in there, and now he was put in there himself. Now, there is a great marble slab covering the stairs down to the vault. That got moved aside. 8 strong men took the heavy lead-lined coffin into its resting place. Now, they were absolutely horrified when they realised that all the coffins in the vault had been moved and were found scattered, helter-skelter, about the small stone-walled crypt.
Yeah.
Right? So on 4 other occasions from 1816 through to 1820, the Chase vault was opened, and again, all the coffins had been moved around. Each time they were carefully replaced and the vault was sealed. And there's no evidence that these were tampered, like the vault was tampered with.
Right.
Okay. So, paranormal?
Earthquake.
I don't know. They say there's no evidence that the vaults have been tampered with, but if this... Colonel Thomas was what he was said to have been, a very foul-tempered and bad slave owner, wouldn't there be, sort of people on the plantation saying, right, let's just go and desecrate his tomb and we can put the slab back and nobody would be the wiser.
Yeah, but if they're all lead lined, they're going to be really heavy. I'd still say, is there any fault lines nearby?
Well, let's have a little look a little bit deeper.
Because if it's not an earthquake, then maybe the tremors causing vibrations and moving it.
Well, I don't know. We might get to that. Bear with us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a British colony. Barbados is a British colony, largely based on tobacco and cotton, and obviously at the expense of the slave trade.
Yeah.
Okay. The church, the existing church, overlooking the Chase Vault, excuse me, is actually the 4th that was built on the site. And overall, it's the 5th. The original was actually built too close to the shore and was actually destroyed by high waters 40 years later. That wasn't replaced until 1780, but further inland on higher ground alongside an old cemetery. Now, the Chase Vault was already there, though it had not been used when this first church was built. And that church has been rebuilt 3 times after various hurricanes and fires. So you've got the original church, which was on the shoreline, that got destroyed. But up the hill, you've got the graveyard, where they then built the church. And that has had 3 or 4 incarnations now. And that is where the Chase Vault is. So it's up a hill. It's away from high waters. Okay. They think the vault was built in 1724 for a man named James Elliot, but it was never used. It's a stone room with an arched roof, 3.7 metres deep and 2 metres wide. And it's below ground level. You access it via stairs. Okay. Now, a surviving original record that recorded burial details says it was more than 80 years for the Chase's Vault's first known occupant, which was Thomasina Goddard, and she was buried in 1807. Okay. Right. She was left in place when Thomas Chase purchased it. At the death of his daughter, Maria Chase, he had to bury his second daughter. So that Marianne and Dorcas were then put into the vault, right? Alongside Thomasina. And it was only a month after that he died himself. And then they realised this movement of coffins and dereliction inside had gone ahead.
Right.
So you've got 3 bodies in there already before they put him in there.
Right, okay.
Now, in 1816, the infant Samuel Brewster Ames was put in there, and the coffins were scrambled. And Thomas Chase's coffin was said to be leaning head down against the wall. They restacked the coffins properly, and the vault was closed again. 2 months later, when adult Samuel Brewster was laid to rest, it was again found in disarray. When the Chase Vault accepted its final occupant, Thomasina Clark, in 1819, it was again found disturbed. They inspect the vault each time and found it to be solid, no secret passages, no other accesses. And so what they did was they decided to open the vault later to see what had happened, basically, what's going on. Sand was put across the floor to capture any footprints. So somebody, like you said, somebody had gone in there to wreak revenge, as it were.
Yeah.
You'd find footprints in the sand. And the marble slab covering the stairs was actually cemented in place. So you're not going to be able to remove that without it being known. Okay. And official seals were put on it as well. The governor, Lord Combermere, was said to have placed their official seals in the cement. In 1820, the vault was opened. All was undisturbed, including the sand and seals, except the coffins, which again were scattered and tumbled around each other. They were all removed and buried separately, and the vault was left open and unsealed, which is where it remains to this day. So now you can go into the vault. I say you can go into it with permission, obviously. It's unsealed. They won't put coffins in there now.
Oh, right.
They've all been removed and buried separately in like in a normal grave.
Yeah, that is definitely a strange one, but I still think it could be just the vibrations.
Well, when we come back from our break, we're going to actually have a look at this a little bit deeper, because this has actually been covered, looked at quite intensively by Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com magazine.
Okay.
The podcast and the online magazine. So we're actually going to have a look at that and see what he came up with in regards to this particular tale. So rejoin us straight after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. So before the break, we were talking about the Chase Crypt in Barbados. Now, this story, as we've talked about, is very famous, for the crypts moving with no sign of anybody breaking in and doing it. So, I actually went to Brian Dunning at Skeptoid.com to have a look, because he's actually looked into this quite a lot. And I love Brian Dunning's work, actually. Just a little shout out to Brian Dunning, because, this is where research comes in, right?
Of course it does. Of course it does.
Because this story is still bandied about in the paranormal field quite extensively. And they focus on the fact that the coffins were moved and thrown around the crypt and don't really care if there's a logical explanation or not.
Yeah. It sounds good. It's a good story, isn't it?
It's a great story.
Let's face it. It's a great story, mysteriously moved coffins and stuff, yeah.
It is a great story. Now, this is where research comes in, and this is like proper research, like archive research and records office research, because the vault is there, the death records are on file. The only thing that's missing is any evidence that anyone was placed in the vault ever.
Oh. Well,
dun,
it doesn't.
Dun, dun.
You do sort of allude to that before the break, didn't you? Saying it is now sort of empty, and perhaps it was always empty, thinking about it.
And then someone's gone, why is it empty? And then this long convoluted story has come up.
Yeah.
Right, so what you do is you go back to the Alpha case.
Yeah.
So you go, so where does it come from? Where does this story come from? If we've got no evidence that anyone was ever placed in the vault, why is there this story? Now, the events that was outlined came from Captain James Alexander's 1833 book, The Transatlantic Sketches. Didn't give any source for this, but that's where the story comes from. In 1907, a researcher by the name of Andrew Lang gave a talk that was published in Folklore, a quarterly review on myth, tradition, institution and customs. He covered Alexander's book and also accounts from the day, such as burial records in the Book of Christchurch that confirmed the deaths, but also original accounts of the disrupted coffins, such as that was said to be given to the governor himself in the 1868 memoirs and letters of Lord Combermere. But there don't seem to be any surviving copies of this book.
Right.
All right.
That's handy.
Yeah, exactly. So you go, right, okay. And Lang was not even able to find it as well. He did uncover several second-hand tellings of the tale. So this is a folklore story. This is an urban legend, right?
Yeah. Well, it seems to be going down that route.
Okay. All seem to trace back to a man identified as the rector of the Christchurch Parish Church. And the name is given variously. It's either Thomas Harrison or Thomas Alderson.
Right.
Right. Now, we then go into 1848. The book, The History of Barbados, gives a slightly different version of the story. He says that Lord Combermere had only heard about disturbed coffins, and it was the family who decided to scatter the sand on the floor, and that Lord Combermere showed up at the church in 1820 and ordered the vault to be opened to see for himself. Him and his party discovered the coffins thrown about. But the guy who wrote the book, Robert Schmomberg, didn't provide a source for this.
Okay.
So again, original Alpha case sources are not there. They're just, again, folklore second-hand stories. Now, lots of researchers have actually had a look at this, right? The most notable being on the Committee for Skeptical Inquiries, which is Joe Nichol. Right now, Nichol's not convinced by the documentary evidence. He doesn't dispute that the deaths and the dates, just the story of the vault. He found a different explanation for the story from the world of Freemasonry, and he wrote about this in Fate magazine in 1982. And Nichol claims that the language used in the oldest accounts to describe the tale was laden with Masonic symbology. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, right.
Oh dear, he argued...
As you would expect.
Well, as you do. He argued the entire case was not an account of literal events that have actually taken place, but it's actually an allegory constructed from Masonic symbols, such as the sound of the hammer used to certify the solidity of the vault's walls even, the ceiling representing the Royal Arch degree.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of a secret vault as central to Freemasonry, and the men who actually sealed the door referred to as Masons. So he thinks it's actually something completely different.
Okay.
Right. Interesting.
Okay. Various researchers have also looked at natural explanations. Earthquakes pull ball to the table.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
we have earthquakes, yeah.
Universally rejected. Barbados is not seismically active. There was no special earthquakes. I'm going to be volcanoes here. No special earthquakes were recorded there during 1812 to 1820.
Yeah, but are they looking in the wrong place? Because we can feel earthquakes in the UK that have happened like across the globe. Something happens in China, we can feel it over here.
Not to the degree that it would have caused these coffins to move.
Yeah, you can pick them up on a seismograph. But,
But it's still vibrations that get this far. So if there's something that happened, I don't know, 50 to 100 miles away, did they look that far away?
Well, it's been universally rejected, darling,
Yeah, well, they're wrong.
as being an explanation. Water was another one. If water got into the vault, it could have floated the coffins into any position, basically. However, these are heavy coffins.
Yeah.
Right? Are the coffins buoyant? Could water have gotten into the vault, drained out unnoticed? Where would the water have come from?
Yeah, I think you'll see signs if the vault had been flooded.
So you have to look at, look at the weight of the coffins. Would they have floated? They would only have floated if their weight was less than the equivalent volume of water. Now, although we don't know the size of any of the coffins, you roughly can guess. It's an unlikely explanation.
Yeah.
The volume of water you would need to float a coffin like that is
it would take the vault to actually totally flood to lift coffins, and that's if they stayed sealed during the process. If the coffins flooded as well, they would just stay
where they were, yeah. Because they have to displace the water, haven't they?
Yeah.
And also, don't forget of where this vault is. It's not on the shoreline like it was. Not the vault itself. The vault is sort of up. It's 33 metres, an elevation of 33 metres.
Yeah.
It's also on limestone being highly porous, and actually has a very high percolation rate, drainage rate. So if it was to become inundated with water, it could easily drain out through the ground, right? And Barbados does get a lot of rain. 100
monsoons. Yeah.
But that means the water's then got to collect in the vault before it drains, collect in the vault to float the coffins to then drain away.
Yeah.
It's a possibility.
But under the circumstances, no, I can't see it. I just can't.
But they do think that the Nichols proposal is actually more closer to the mark. It's more like a story that sort of a folklore, urban legend story about the vault. They're with Masonic overtones in it, and it's not actually a real life occurrence.
Right.
They do think that there is another story actually, that basically identical story that happened on an island off Estonia. And these events are basically copycatted. Yeah. all of those are there. But again, regarding the Chase vault, it's highly unlikely that this is a true story, unfortunately.
Yeah. I've actually seen photos inside crypts and vaults, and sort of well-used ones, and they're not very sort of well laid out places. I mean, coffins and stuff are literally all stacked up on top of each other and everything.
Yeah.
And if it was used at all, I mean, if that was sort of like the same practice, they sort of managed to lug it down and just put it where there's room to actually put it.
Mm.
And and they don't look very sort of aesthetically pleasing to the eye. And I've even seen photos and inside vaults where they have coffins standing up on end.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that could possibly give some insight into the story. But as you're saying, Kerry,
there's no evidence of it.
There's no evidence of it, is there?
Not really. But if it's true, it's more likely to be the rainwater thing, where the vault fills up with water because of the heavy rainfall, moves the coffins, move coffins, and then because of the drainage capacity of the stone it's made out of, drains away. That's, if you're going to look for an explanation, that's the most logical explanation for it. Rather than jump into the paranormal, you do kind of have to look at the maybe possibly rational. But as to regards of, the bodies actually being there in the first place, it's sceptical. So, you know what I mean? You do have to look at this. And so, guys, go check out skeptoid.com. Brian Dunning is the editor of that page and does a podcast. Fascinating, some of the information he researches. Is amazing, absolutely amazing man. I've been trying to pin him down for years. I will, like I did with Darren Ritson. I will nag until I get. Absolutely amazing what he uncovers, and the true researcher.
Yeah.
Don't just look at paranormal. It's one thing to be skeptical. You have to have that balance, don't you?
You do. You
have to be skeptical and try and find the rational, because there may well be a rational explanation, but be open-minded enough to accept that there may well be something abnormal, paranormal, going on as well. But in most cases, I think stories like this, you can generally explain.
Yeah.
Right?
Very much so.
Okay. So, the next incredibly famous one is... I keep doing that through this show.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Calm down, woman.
I know, I'm excited. This is St. Peter's Crypt in Basilica. This is in Rome.
Yes, underneath the Vatican.
If you want, oh God, Merc, and oh God, you just have to look at the Roman Catholic Church. I apologise for any Roman Catholics who are listening to this. It is just incredible, actually, the power of this particular place, shall we say. This, all the cardinals and the Pope and that are there, aren't they? And they hold a lot of power.
Yeah.
One place I would like to go to is their vault.
Mm.
But you can't just go in there. You actually have to have an appointment. You have to have a specific reason why you want to be in there. You can only look at the documents that you have said that you're looking at. They'll pull them out for you and put you in a room with those documents and those documents alone. You're not allowed to just rifle through
it's not
down there.
It's not your traditional lending library.
It certainly isn't. The Vatican Library would be amazing.
And you'll have to have a good reason, and as you say, researchers and stuff will be the only people that can really get access to it.
They ask a lot of questions as well before they give you permission.
Mm.
They want to know what angle you're going for, why you want the research, why you want to have a look at the document, all the rest of it. And if they think it's going to give it a false negative, a false perspective towards the Roman Catholic Church, they don't allow you in.
Yeah.
It's really strict. And they do say there are a lot of secrets in that particular vault. But that's not the one we're going to look at tonight. We are going to have a look at the actual St. Peter's crypt. St. Peter, obviously, one of the apostles, right?
Yep. That he was.
Okay, now, where do we start with this? In 1950, on Christmas Eve, the words of Pope Pius the 12th.
Yes.
I rely on you for this one, Rich, because this is Roman numerals.
Yeah, it's all right.
On his Christmas radio message said, "The tomb of the Prince of the Apostles has been found."
All right.
The Prince of the Apostles is Peter, who was given the keys to the church by Jesus himself. And they had announced on Christmas Eve, 1950, that his tomb had been found.
Cool.
However, there's a lot of controversy
There would be.
around this. I keep wanting to go dun, 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 on this kind of thing. I really do.
You've got us on the edge of a seat.
I know. I really tried to stop myself from doing it then. Now, oh, goodness me. Lots of things have come out about this. Now,
Dun, dun, dun.
I know, right? Where do we start? At the death of Pope Pius XI, Eugenio Pacelli succeeded him on March the 2nd in 1939. Now, they give him a new name, and then he becomes Pius the 12th.
Right.
Right? And this basically is it's about continuity. That's why they change their names and do it, right?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's a tradition. I mean, it's the same with sort of British monarchs. You know, I mean, and some of them changed their names as well.
Now, when Pius XII took the position, he wanted to fulfil the wish of his predecessor, and his wish was to be buried in the sacred Vatican grottos, the Grotte Vatican, and he wanted to be near the tomb of Pius X.
Right.
Right, and that's the tomb traditionally attributed to St. Peter. This underground tomb area is in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica and is actually located exactly below the Great Dome of the magnificent Italian structure, yeah?
Yeah, it's beneath that, and in the hall you've got a huge sort of structure built over the site of his tomb. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in World War II, official work began under the altar of confession and Bernini's baldachin. Now, there had been other excavations in 1925 and 1939, but they'd all ended early, and the third excavation was well timed. Okay, and it would hopefully confirm the traditional belief that Peter's tomb was located in the crypt under the heart of the Vatican City.
Yeah, I can see why they would want that to be, wouldn't they?
Okay. Now, you've got to remember there's a lot of historical structures above, so they've got to think about all this digging, all this mucking around underneath. You've got to avoid structural problems. So the Vatican researchers decided to dig a tunnel under the altar leading to the area of interest in the crypt. Now, this was the beginning of a series of poorly coordinated and badly completed tasks, and every person that was involved did a little on their own, right? They did it without an excavation log, and debris was just simply piling it up in boxes and taken away. It's really bad archaeology is all I can say. I think part of that is probably to do with the secrecy that the Vatican themselves is, not getting it done, excavated properly is probably a major issue.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think they probably got archaeologists on site for it, and the Vatican is a state in its own right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't think they've probably got an archaeological department.
No. Well, in 1941, the excavations reached a brick wall. Now, this brick wall was actually identified as part of Nero's circus, which, according to tradition, Peter was martyred and crucified upside down at Nero's circus.
Right.
Okay. Now, the excavation campaign continued even while bombs were being dropped by the Allies. Now, the Vatican was actually hit by 5 bombs during World War II.
Yeah, I mean, they had a sort of they did try to avoid it, but sort of bombing Rome in general. There was the Allies, and at the time there was huge concern of the damage they could cause, but they went ahead and bombed anyway. But I think, the Vatican can think themselves lucky that they're only hit 5 times.
Mm-hmm. It didn't stop the work. It continued until 1949. Now, loads of people were involved in this. Now, those are well documented. They've got very airy-fairy titles, like the architect in charge of the surveys and the inspector of the Pontifical Commission of Sacred Archaeology and things like that. So they've got the titles, but do they have the experience, is what I would argue.
Probably not. They're all various cardinals at the end of the day, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah.
Now, the results of the excavation work were actually presented to the Pope in a report. I'm not even going to attempt the name of the report.
Oh.
I'm not Italian. That's all I can say. But according to the report, the excavations below the altar of confession led to the discovery of a vast pagan necropolis that was called P, in which various burial tombs were found.
Right.
Okay? Now, according to some historical sources, Emperor Constantine moved what was supposedly Peter's bones from one of the tombs on the ground level to a burial shrine nearby.
Yeah.
Now, this tiny structure was soon recognised by the archaeologists and so-called Trophy of Gaius.
Right, whatever that means, yeah.
The burial found by the Vatican archaeologists was in poor condition. It was placed against a wall covered in red plaster, and a niche had been dug, and in the niche were 2 small columns holding a slab of travertine, which is actually a type of stone. Right, there's no Christian symbols available, visible, and it's unusual for a shrine that was believed to have been built by the followers of Jesus to not include these symbols.
Some sort of iconography on it, yeah.
Yeah, generally they would. Followers of Jesus would use images and frescoes and graffiti, especially on things that they view to be holy remains. But this didn't have any of that. The next step was the attribution of this shrine, I'm going to call it. So they had to look at it and go, right, okay, so what is this? Right. Now, there was a confirmation of an oral tradition reported by Eusebius of Caesarea.
Good old Eusebius.
In his work, the Historia Ecclesiastica, whatever that word is. And this was actually attributed to one of the weakest links in the entire chain of data and findings. So they kind of looked at that and went, right, he wrote about it, it must be that.
Yeah. They're taking a stab in the dark there, aren't they?
Yeah, never jump to an assumption. Now, he reported he'd heard a story from his teacher in Caesarea, who in turn had learnt it from Origen of Alexandria. Now, this is going back to AD. This is going back a long time, right?
Yeah.
They'd had disagreements with certain various followers, and that a sect had detached from Christianity that actually followed, and that, when we talk about religion and we talk about it's the same religion but it's got different factions.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is a bit like what's happened here.
Yeah, you usually get a core religion and they have schisms, don't they? And they break off all in their different factions of the same thing.
Yeah,
really.
So this sect followed the Montanism part of Christianity.
Yeah.
Right? So they're following the teachings of Montanus and his revelations. We should have got Matt Arnold on for this bit, I have to say.
Yeah.
He probably would have made more sense of it than I can, right? Now, he reports in the words, I can show you the trophies of the apostles. If you want to go to the Vatican Hill or the Ostian Way, you will find the trophies of these two, Peter and Paul, who founded this church.
Right.
Okay, but he doesn't say what these trophies are. So, of course, when they're doing this archaeology and, bring it back to what we're talking about, they're at the Basilica, they're doing this archaeology underneath, they find this shrine, it's got no Jesus iconography on it at all, but they find this reference in a book that was written about the trophies of the apostles.
Yeah, it was like the medals, first, second, third, fourth, etc.
Exactly, but they don't. It's not detailed what these artifacts would be.
No.
So there's a massive jump of assumption that this is the remains of Peter and Paul.
Mm.
Okay. Now, again, we've gone to a verbal story that's been written down. It's like it was passed by person to person and then finally got written down into this book.
Yeah.
So that's where this testimony comes from. But it was actually widely accepted by specialists who found this shrine. It's called an ardicula, but I'm going to call it a shrine. Found in this crypt, that's what they think it is. Right? So, now, Constantine, going back to the 5th century, and this is in the Liber Pontificalis again, Constantine wanted to protect the shrine and the bones of a double sarcophagus of silver and gilded bronze. It was 1.5 meters long on each side and on it was placed a cross of solid gold that was donated by the emperor and his mother Helena.
Right.
Now, this double sarcophagus was built and positioned in the years 321 to 326 AD. Now, exactly above the shrine, Constantine commissioned the construction of the Basilica Constantiniana. He levelled the ground, burying the tombs. So this is all around, this is why they're all coming to the assumption that this is what this is. Right? And why all the popes want to be buried closest to it.
Right, yeah.
Right? Because it's like the most sacred part, and they're all, up to now, it not been found, and they're all digging around trying to find it, right? So the underground tomb was then protected by an outer wall. That wall was covered with graffiti. Various popes had built their altars directly over the place that were attributed to Peter's tomb. So it's very confusing down there. You've got a lot of things going on under this ground, right? It includes the altar of Gregory the Great, right? The altar of Clement the Eighth.
Right.
Right, Clement,
yes.
Maybe one of your old relatives is there. But where's Saint Peter? Where are his bones? So they've got all this going on, but they're going, we still haven't found Peter. Which is actually why the basilica was built in the first place. Where it was built is the reason it was built was because it's the most sacred place. On this hill, you will bury my bones, or whatever it was, and then they built a big church on top of it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, in 846 AD, the Saracens sacked the basilica. They entered the crypt and scattered the alleged bones of Peter on the ground. Right? Nasty Saracens, for one. But how confusing does that make the archaeology in the future?
Yeah, I mean, they're just stabbing in the dark.
Right. Now, Protestant specialist Oscar Coleman said he accepted that it's possibly the shrine, but said, but what tomb has been found? There's no name, there's no bones. We found something. I grant you it's a possibility, but we can't prove it. And he was more like, we need more proof on this. Right? Now, he followed the church, Luther. Now, in Rome, and it states, in Rome, it is not known where the bodies of Saints Peter and Paul are, or even if they are there. The Pope and the cardinals know very well that they do not know.
Yeah.
right? So we've got then this other side of people going, well, we don't believe they're there. The Pope and that know it is, but this is a myth that they're perpetuating.
Yeah.
And because
Sounds
of how
plausible.
And because of how lax the excavations were, under the basilica, it caused a lot of issues in regards to the archaeology that might have proved that it was.
Yeah.
Because they violently broke through the altar of Callista, causing the ancient protective wall which was covered with red plaster, called the Red Wall, to collapse. The rubble collapsed into the next burial area above the bones placed there by Constantine. So the bones weren't seen immediately. They were finally noticed by Monsieur Cassus,
yeah.
Whoever he is. Now, his pious nature, because, I don't think that the intention is bad by any of these people. I think it's, I think it's ignorance. I don't think they really.
Well, yeah, I mean, they want it, don't they? And they're all sort of like giving their bit of spin.
Mm-hmm. Now, he was good enough. His nature required him to collect the bones both of pagans and Christians in a box so that they could be buried later. However, these had a very different end. They were forgotten about in the Vatican grottos. They remained there for 10 years, and in reality, the bones in the crypt turned out to be animal and human. One wonders, were they really Peter's bones? Could they have been mixed in with the other bones that they found? Bearing in mind, you've got a lot of other stuff that had gone on through historical stuff that had gone on with the Saracens and stuff, so it could easily have been Peter, but it may not have been either.
No, it could have been someone else, because it sounds like this hill originally was a bit of a boneyard anyway.
Exactly. In the 1949 excavations, Antonio Ferrua actually stopped a worker who was carrying debris on a wheelbarrow. The worker had been hit by a piece of plaster on which there were inscriptions. He decided to take the piece home, and that remained in his possession for 10 years. Right? Until it got returned to the Vatican. So you've got people are taking bits home. I've got a bit of the Vatican here.
Of course they would.
Yeah.
Of course they would.
The tomb, yes. On the mantelpiece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the second phase of the excavation continued from 1952 to 1957. By now, they've already put it out to the world that they found the tomb of St. Peter.
Right.
But they're not 100% sure that they have.
I think the Pope may have sort of jumped the gun a bit, but, well, there you go. He made the announcement.
Okay.
Yeah, but when you're excited, you jump the gun, don't you?
Yeah. Now, the piece of plaster, if you remember the piece of plaster with the inscriptions, came back to the Vatican. She found traces of red on it, and she discovered that it fitted perfectly into a spot on the red wall, and she concluded that it must have fallen from there. This is a lady called Guarducci. Margarita, we're going to call her Margie, just for argument's sake. Margarita, even. Margie. I've shortened it even more.
Yeah. Maggie.
Yeah, well, whatever. She concluded that it must have fallen from that part of the red wall, and she also found 7 Greek letters on the plaster fragment. She translated the inscription to mean Petros Eni, or Peter is here. She then thought she'd found final proof that Peter was actually buried at that location. However, the bones still hadn't been found. She then began to question all of those who had taken part in the excavation, and it was discovered that Monsieur Cass, after excavation work for the day, had collected the bone fragments and put them in the box, right, that was in the containers in the Grotto Vatican. She was able to find the one that tagged the location where she was looking at by the red wall. Now, luckily enough, he'd actually written where various bits had been found. It was actually lying on the ground, separated from other boxes of materials. Now, she opened the box, she found red painted plaster and minute samples of a reddish fabric, which also had gold threads in it. The tests on the bones lasted 10 years, till 1963, and they confirmed that it was a single male individual who had lived about 2,000 years ago, and it was almost a complete skeleton. The only thing missing were the bones of the feet, which confirmed the belief that Peter had been crucified upside down.
Right.
Ooh. Interesting.
So thanks to her, they've actually sort of like, we're getting a bit closer to the truth, right?
Yeah.
Well, she seems to have conducted, to the best of her knowledge, an investigation, and hasn't she, sort of trying to pull bits and pieces together from here, there, and everywhere, by the sounds of it.
You imagine trying to rebuild a crime scene after it had been dismantled and spread across the Vatican and in boxes here, there and everywhere, and oh my God, and then reconstructed after somebody had knocked it down by accident, and oh my God, you know, it's just just seems to be a complete nightmare. The work that she's done is phenomenal, really, when you think about the task she had ahead of her. Now, the bone fragments also show traces of reddish coloration. Now, it confirmed the contact with red cloth for a very long time. Now, chemical examinations of the cloths determined that it was a murex dyed and that the gold was authentic. So basically, the man's bones have been wrapped in a purple royal fabric. Murex fades to red. Okay?
Right.
Containing gold threads. Now, the petrographic examination of the soil confirmed that the findings came from the same area of the red wall.
Right, they're certainly throwing a bit of science at this now, aren't they?
Now they're throwing it, but now we've got the science as well.
True.
Okay.
That is very true.
Now, the official announcement was made by Paul the 6th, V1, to the world of the Catholic faith, and the bones were placed in 19 sealed plexiglass containers and placed where Constantine had buried them 16 centuries earlier. However, not as easy as that.
Yeah.
Another specialist who worked on the project, Kirschbaum, had an opinion that was contrary to that of the Pope and Margarita, basically. He supported on several occasions by other experts who translated the phrase, the Greek phrase, Peter is missing. That's what he translated it to mean, not Peter is here.
Oh, right.
Others translated it as Petronius, which identified a rich Christian buried with due honours. So it's not Peter at all, it's just a rich Christian.
Yeah.
And other experts translated the inscription to Peter is not here. So they've got the bones of this person that's been buried in rich fabrics. Yeah.
Yeah, Peter's down the pub.
And because of the translation, we've got everything from Peter is here to Peter's not here.
Yeah.
So Peter could have been there.
So he could be, he might not be. So this is, again, is he, isn't he? We still haven't got a confirmed 100% agreed on kind of position here. They couldn't even agree on the so-called mystical cryptography, which Margarita believed she had discovered amongst the graffiti of Wall G. According to her, it was a secret writing which Christians sent greetings of eternal life to their deceased, right? Secret, because obviously Rome weren't very happy about all of this. Now, it was actually a technique used by pagans and not actually seen amongst the Christians. So, again, they're going, well, hang on, you're saying this is a secret language which Christians sent, but we know that it's not because it was used by pagans, not Christians.
Right.
Oh, so this is a big argument brewing amongst the scientific community.
Yeah, as you can imagine.
Yes, very much so. So the bones and their remains and the interpretations, all of this ends up in this big basic argument between Margarita and Ferrier, who, well, one says that it is, one says it isn't, and both finding various people to back themselves up and not and whatnot.
Yeah.
And basically, Ferrier dies in 2003. He was 103 as well.
Well, it's quite long-lived then.
He was very long-lived. And he carried on. He did not stop. He had a personal and conscientious battle against Margarita. But he was unsuccessful. Because all it did, no one swung to his perspective, no one swung to her, but it sort of still hung in the balance. And the Vatican still went with Margarita.
Yeah, well, it backed up their claims more, didn't it? She told them what they wanted to hear.
However, and the plot thickens, everybody, Margarita reported that she had been betrayed and abandoned by the Vatican, but she maintained her position regarding the excavations until she died in 1997.
Oh, so even though the Vatican turned her back on her, she still kept to her findings.
She still kept to her guns. Yeah. However, they didn't even go and think about the story that's written in the Bible. That tells a completely different story.
Oh, does it?
The scriptures state that while Paul was sent as a missionary to the Gentiles and then to Rome, Peter was instead sent by the elders of Jerusalem to the eastern part of the known world. This included Samaria and the areas of Babylon. Peter wrote, "She who is in Babylon, a chosen one like you, sends you her greetings, and so does Mark, my son." Someone wanted to see in Babylon the city of Rome to indicate that he was there. It is a statement without basis because Peter was in fact really sent to Babylon. And there is a flourishing Jewish community. So, geographical indications suggest that he wasn't anywhere near Rome. He was actually in Babylon.
Yeah.
Right?
Got lost.
Got lost along the way. Paul, in 56 AD, sent written greetings to about 30 Christians in Rome, but didn't mention Peter once.
Right.
He wrote 6 more very important letters from Rome, even during Nero's most fiery persecutions, and in these letters he doesn't mention Peter.
And it seems to be conspicuous by his absence.
And in other letters, Paul refers to when the two met in cities like Antioch.
Right.
The historical accounts of Acts mentions Paul's arrival in Rome at the Appian Market and the 3 taverns, a nice pub meeting. Meet me at the pub.
Yeah, let's go down the pub and have a chat about it.
He met with Christians, but Peter was not there. So according to the Greek Christian scriptures, Paul worked in Rome and Peter worked in the Middle East. So this means that the bones that are buried in the plexiglass boxes that everyone's argued about being of Peter are not those of Peter.
No. As a stretch, possibly they could be Paul, but again, who knows?
I know, right? Anyway, in 1953 in Jerusalem, in the burial ground of Dominus Flevit, in this ancient burial ground, archaeologists actually found an ossuary bearing the name of Peter in Aramaic. Now, it's translated as Shimon Bar Jonah, close to other ossuaries labelled with the names of characters found in the Gospels. So that's actually where they think the bones of Peter are.
Oh, right. Yeah. Interesting one. I think from that, I don't know. Possibly, the Vatican would love them to be there, right in their back garden, wouldn't they?
They would, wouldn't they?
Of course.
I mean,
and that's the whole reason the church was built there.
Yeah.
On the tomb or the resting place of Peter.
But as you say, it was a pagan site before, and again, it is very common for Christians and churches to sort of be built on pagan sites.
Yeah.
And the Vatican is no different.
No. It is an incredibly interesting one, I have to say. And I think when I was looking into this, I got this information from Ancient Origins, but I do think when I was researching around this, there were people saying that when you go and visit, because you can visit it, you have to book. I would say this, if you go to Atlas Obscura, they talk about you can book it, but you have to book months and months in advance, and make sure that you go. You can't change your slot once you've got your slot, and that it depends on your tour guide and their belief system. Some will say outright it's Peter, no questions about it. Another one will give you both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
You know, another one will give you the full story, as it were. We really ain't got a clue who this is, but that's what they think, you know, kind of thing. So it is interesting, but I do think what it shows, right, when Rome was being built, Nero, the Emperor Nero, this is something I looked into when I was looking at conspiracy theory, because it is the basis of one of the oldest conspiracy theories going. Now, back into day, when Nero had, was the Emperor of Rome, he was quite a character. I think we all know who Emperor Nero is, don't we?
Yes.
Right, and they were very against Christians, but they tolerated them to a level until we had a situation where there was a big fire in Rome, and it was actually focused on the Jewish and the Christian kind of hovels and slums.
Yeah.
Right, but before that, Nero had actually drawn up plans to landscape Rome in his own imagination. He'd actually written it out, but then this fire happened, and it was put about by Christians and Jews that this was deliberately set on fire because as a way of getting rid of us, basically.
Yeah.
So it became a negative narrative against Nero. And Nero was like, no, actually, I wasn't just sitting there playing my violin and eating grapes. I was actually, getting my Roman troops to try and put out this fire. This is really bad. But this is actually what triggered the main persecution against Christians from Nero's perspective, because they had started this negative diatribe against him, basically.
Yeah.
Now, did he start the fire because he wanted to landscape Rome in his own vision? Possibly. We don't know. So the Christians could have had a point. From his perspective, he didn't. It's just happened to be. I mean, he did end up landscaping Rome to his vision. Do you know what I mean? So he did end up doing it, but that was only after the fire. So again, didn't he kind of scenario.
Yeah.
But this is like a narrative that was around at the time, and it's actually you can date this back to being the very first conspiracy theory that he deliberately did it to get what he wanted, which is horrible when you think about the amount of people that died in that fire.
Well, yeah, and and where do you go with that? I mean, did he? Didn't he? I mean, you don't know. I mean, many great cities throughout time were subject to fires at some point.
I mean, you've got to remember living conditions in slums and hovels. I mean, they're all wood structures. They're all cooking on open fires. The infrastructure isn't there, folks. Do you know what I mean? If a fire's going to go, it's not going to take a lot for it to go into a big fire, that's going to wipe out whole areas. You've only got to look at the Great Fire in London.
Well, that's right. And even after that, they looked for scapegoats.
Yeah.
Exactly. Something purely accidental then blows up into a political argument.
Yeah.
And using that narrative to feed your own narrative, as it were, in the same way as that the Vatican, use the narrative that Peter's bones are buried there and it's the most sacred site and all the popes want to be buried close to him, when in actual fact, we can't prove he's there at all.
At all, yeah.
He might be, but he might not be. Scripture doesn't back it up. Greek scripture doesn't back it up, should I say. But it's interesting. I do find it very interesting. And I think, you're going so far back in history. And what do they say? Who writes history?
The winners. It is, it's a foregone conclusion, isn't it? The winner's always right history.
Of course. Fascinating though, when you start looking at the murkiness of various stories and where they come from and backing up facts, and and now we've got the tests. I mean, God, it really does open it up. Now, what's an ossuary? An ossuary
is a box that contains bones.
So is the Paris catacombs an ossuary?
I've heard it called an ossuary. There are sort of, if you tap in ossuary to a search engine, it will sort of bring up places like the Paris catacombs, and there are certain churches here in the UK which have what are called ossuaries in the basement, where they're just mini Paris catacombs where they stack bones. But I think the original for an ossuary, I mean, the Jewish tradition was you laid somebody to rest in their tomb, and after a year, once they're decomposed, you would basically take and collect the bones, put them in an ossuary, and then put that on a shelf in the vault tomb, and because it frees up space for someone else to go in.
Yeah, and actually in Rome, there's loads of catacombs, same as Paris catacombs, where you've got bones and bones and bones, skulls and skulls and skulls. And churches, there are even churches that are built with bones, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple here in the UK. There's one in Kent, which hopefully I'll be able to pay a visit to at some time, which has got all the bones and everything all sort of stacked quite neatly in the vault beneath, which you can go into and have a look at.
Paul, did you just hear that? He said I.
Yeah.
Wow.
We.
Well,
yeah,
you're more than welcome to come along.
Horrified by that.
And they do open it from Easter onwards anyway, so hopefully it will get to be opened up at some point this year.
As you can hear, we're all very hopeful that the lockdown in the UK is being lifted and we're finally going to be allowed to go out and about a bit more than we have been.
We're all in the starting blocks.
We are in the starting blocks, ready for that gun to go off, and then we're off and doing things and hopefully getting out and about. So, guys, there you go. We've gone from Tales from the Crypt, the magazines and the influence that they've had, through to some tales of oubliettes, tombs in Rome, and crypts in Barbados. What do you make of all that?
Well, where do we go from here then?
Yeah. What are we going to bring to the table next week?
It just goes to show, from sort of like you can start off from comic strips with something as benign as a comic strip, which can lead through to sort of biblical archaeological discoveries, with that link of crypts, tombs, oubliettes. These are things that people do tend to have a definite view of, but are they that straightforward as people think? I think not.
I agree. So what do we think then of the concept of disturbing these kind of situations would trigger paranormal activity?
I don't know so much, because disturbing a burial place, a tomb, is a relatively modern idea. Once you're laid to rest, you're laid to rest. I mean, but from the ossuaries, I mean, it was commonplace for people to put bones or to put a body somewhere, wait for them to decay, and then move the bones to another location, as long as they were kept together. Mm-hmm. And that would free up space again to, so that was sort of done throughout history. And this sort of, the modern concept of disturbing a burial site is, well, as I said, a modern day concept.
Yeah.
Where you're supposed to be buried or laid to rest and left there. regardless.
Yeah, but we've always dug up bodies, one thing or another. If it wasn't the sack 'em ups, body snatchers, it was something else. So we've always dug up the bodies.
But as regards to paranormal activity, if bodies are moved and stuff like that, I mean, sounds plausible. It certainly fits the narrative, doesn't it? I'm sure you would agree there.
Oh, totally.
But does it?
But does
Who
it?
knows?
And if, I mean, there are plenty of, like you say, they've moved bones over the years, and they do have that link to the macabre because you're viewing somebody who was alive and kicking's dead remains. So they do have that link to the underworld and the afterlife. But in regards to paranormal activity, in regards to real activity, we found a lot to do with tourist attraction.
Well, yeah.
Actual real life occurrences, as it were. Do you know what I mean? So is it because then it pulls in those kind of, that fascination with the supernatural? It gives it an added extra, doesn't it?
Oh, it's the story behind it, isn't it? It is, you often hear of, and then you get stories on the other end of the scale of the sort of like the ghosts and the phantoms who wander because their bodies haven't been laid to rest,
Yeah.
So it's a,
It's a double-edged sword.
It is a double-edged sword, isn't it? And those are just the stories we tend to use to sort of paint a peripheral picture of whatever events are occurring.
I find the whole thing fascinating, and I think, again, we come back to the human factor, don't we?
Yeah,
definitely.
The human storytelling factor and the human's, curiosity and draw to the violent history and the way we deal with death.
Yeah,
and even that has been changed over the, when you go through history, our perception of how you deal with death has changed greatly.
It's changed totally, yes. I mean, if we were born even 100 years ago, you wouldn't have gone through life without seeing a dead body, whereas now, quite possibly, you can.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly now, we've got the, even the mental jump from burial to burning, to cremation.
But that's all taken care of, isn't it? I mean,
that's all done before you don't, unless you go and visit the Chapel of Rest, you very rarely see the dead body.
Yeah, that's right. And even that seems to be sort of fading out a bit now. It's all sort of taken care of, I mean, there's only certain people that want to do that, but it's a request now, whereas before, it just was the way it was done.
Well, it used to come to the home, and the coffin would be in the home.
Yeah,
the night before the funeral.
Yeah, that's right.
And people would come in and pay their respects and do. The wake was almost like the day before the funeral.
Yeah, that's right.
But now it's all changed around. The wake's the fun bit, the party bit after the funeral.
Yeah, the party after the funeral.
Everybody lights up and remembers the hysterical stories of the person's life and makes it more of a celebration of that life rather than the mourning period of
that's right.
lead up to the funeral. It does show you how things have changed over the years. But anyway, we're actually come to the end of the show now, guys.
Oh, wow.
No.
If you'd like to read more on the conspiracy theory regarding Emperor Nero, then I've actually written a blog on that, and that's in the Book of Parasearch, which you can go over to Amazon.com and buy, available worldwide. And while you're there, check out our second book, the Book of the Paranormal Concept Extra, our latest book. And if you really want to read more up-to-date blogs that we release on a regular basis, then go over to our website, paranormalconcept.com, where you'll find our latest additions to our blogging journey, shall we say. on that one. I think we're down the fairy route at the moment, aren't we?
I think we are at the moment.
I think we're all away with the fairies at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's all good fun.
It's all good fun. On that note, guys, say good night.
Good night.
Goodbye.